I hope that's convinces some of the current producers out there to really believe this message that all this is not for nothing. The next speaker I'd like to introduce is Fiona Solomon, who works for the Responsible Jewellery Council and is responsible there for developing the standards. The Responsible Jewellery Council is a big organisation in the jewellery industry. To my knowledge, it hasn't really covered pearls to date, but I think that there are some interesting lessons in how you've engaged with the diamond and metal sector, and I think there's some people here it's probably new also. It's going to give us a good overview about it.
Sure. Thanks a lot. And I'll get you the slide up. So I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here today and learn a little bit more about the pearl value chain and pearl production. It's been fascinating. As everyone said, I'm from the Responsible Jewellery Council. We're an organisation that's active in the jewellery supply chain, and as mentioned, at the moment covering diamonds, gold, and platinum bills. So I have there are quite some wordy slides here. I think these are going to be made available afterwards, so just try and talk through them fairly quickly. But we have a lot of material on our website as well, including some recorded versions of introduction to the RJC, understanding our standards, and so on. So I'll just try and bring out, I suppose, some of the elements that might be useful for those among you who are considering where this pearl initiative might be headed. So, the RJC was founded in 2005 by a group of 14 founded organisations, including Tiffany & Co, Cartier, the retail end of the supply chain, and then also at the mining end of the supply chain, companies such as Rio Tinto and De Beers, as well as companies in the middle of the supply chain, jewellery manufacturing, diamond cutting and polishing, and refining. We cover the whole supply chain, from mine to retail with our standards, and so I think that's an important different approach from many of the other organisations that are involved in sustainability standards. And our vision is really that whole supply chain approach, having a responsible supply chain from mine to retail that merits the trust and integrity and the expectations that consumers increasingly have for fine jewellery products. We have a membership structure for the Responsible Jewellery Council. We have a number of forums across the supply chain, and they're not represented here, but also trade associations and members of the council. And our governance structure is structured around that. There are different representatives on the board and committees that are elected from each of those forums, so that no particular part of the supply chain can dominate decision-making processes about standards and about the direction that the organisation heads in. Members join the council, and apart from trade associations that don't have to be certified, any member that's involved in a commercial activity within the supply chain has to be certified within 2 years of joining against our core standard and code of practices. We currently have just over 490 members, and that's out of date, and over 350 certifications have been issued over the last 4 years since the standards became operational in 2009. There's a membership fee structure that's based on the size of the turnover in these materials that our members have. And what the RJC does with that is that we do standards development, which is what I'm involved with, although kind of at the end of that phase now, we've done a whole lot of standards development over the last 7 years, and we're really in the consolidation phase now. The RJC also takes a quality control approach by reviewing audit reports of members, making sure that it complies with our standards and expectations, and then issuing the certification to members and maintaining the website with information about each certification and each member. We accredit audit firms as well, so we have criteria in place for who's competent and experienced to carry out these audits in different parts of the supply chain. So we look at the systems that different audit firms have in place to manage quality, as well as individual auditor experience. And those individual auditors need to have some understanding and familiarity with different parts of the supply chain. Obviously, you need some expertise to audit a mine site or a gold refinery. That's probably different from auditing a boutique, for example, as well as undertaking training on our standards. We have a wide range of stakeholder engagement and collaboration initiatives with stakeholders and with other initiatives. We have communications programs, and an important part of what we do in that membership phase is to conduct training and build capacity within members to actually reach the standards. So a few months ago, we have a new training coordinator that started at RJC in London, which will help to really ramp that up. The audit accreditation piece I've just covered. We have the accreditation process carried out by an independent specialist. The list of accredited audited firms are available on our website. We're a full member of the ICL Alliance. The ICL Alliance is an initiative for sustainability standards that's looking to promote credibility and trust in those initiatives. And it has its own standard setting process, which has codes of good practice for standard setting, for assurance, and for measuring impacts of these kinds of initiatives. And so as a full member, we need to be audited against all those standards as well and demonstrate that we comply with those. But it's also quite a good kind of greenhouse environment for emerging standards, and so for organisations that are considering developing that kind of initiative, even if it's not going into a full-blown sort of certification model, there's a lot of good resources, I think, available there that act as a bit of a recipe book for some of the issues that need to be considered around credibility. Okay, moving on to our standards. So we actually have two standards. One is what we call the Code of Practices, which is our mandatory standard for all members. It applies at the level of the company, and it's really around management systems and particular performance issues. So it covers environment, social, business ethics type issues, as well as general management and oversight of how those happen. We also have a chain of custody standard, which is applicable to gold and platinum group metals. And it also has some dimensions looking at conflict-sensitive sourcing issues. So for those who have been following issues in the gold sector, there's been legislation in the US around financing of adverse human rights abuses and conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has attracted some worldwide attention on how due diligence can be carried out in gold supply chains to end those links with adverse human rights impacts. That certificate process is about the material, and really it's building on the Code of Practices and looking to see that there are responsible business practices at each step of the supply chain. So a lot of standards and perhaps what we've sort of heard about today with a lot of focus on the production end, on the pearl farming end, tend to focus on the production piece only. Whereas what's different about RJC is that we're interested in responsible practices at every single step of the supply chain. So from the chain of custody standards point of view, it can be a bit tricky with lots of very diverse supply chains to try and implement that all at once, and that's one of the reasons why the chain of custody standard is voluntary for RJC members. So just a little bit about the Code of Practices. We just did a really huge revision process over the last couple of years where we engaged again with stakeholders about evolving expectations in the supply chain and thought more carefully about how to make more concrete the different sectors and the different issues that it's addressing. So we have a new structure, as you see there, where we've split out the requirements that are general, that are looking at responsible supply chains and human rights in particular, labour rights and working conditions, health, safety and environment, and also requirements around disclosure and so on in the supply chain, around treatments, around synthetics, how Kimberley process and so on works. A lot of those are requirements that are at the product level. And finally, we also have a whole section on responsible mining, which previously we sort of peppered all through the standard, but we've grouped together in one sector just to draw attention to the fact that we actually do have around a dozen mines under certification. So the RJC is also very focused on harmonising with other initiatives. So there's a range of international programs that we've brought into the standard in the mining sector, in management system certifications such as ISO standards, and also international initiatives such as under the OECD around due diligence in conflict-affected areas. What this aims to do is, particularly in these supply chains, it sounds like you're at a much earlier stage in pearls, but we've seen a big increase in the amount of audit programs that are taking place in gold supply chains and diamond supply chains, both from the retail and producer end coming in to audit the middle, and then also with refiners in particular, where there are a big focus on the audits of refiners in order to understand their due diligence practices towards sources. So any opportunity that we can find to kind of try and reduce that duplication and look at cross-recognition programs, that's something that we're very active in. We have obviously certificates because we give certification, and that information in terms of the scope of the certification and also the certificate information is available on our website. We issue certification for 3 years if there are no major non-conformances, and we also offer kind of a provisional certification for 1 year if there are major non-conformance issues. And during the certification period, members need to address those. So they need to be working on corrective action to correct any issues that have been found during the audit. And I was talking about this with someone earlier, that the IJC doesn't see itself as a policeman, coming in to try and catch people out. What we're looking to achieve is an improvement in practices, a commitment to continual improvement by our members as they better understand what good practice, what best practice is, and continue to kind of raise the bar over time. We have a lot of material on our website that aims to help companies do that. We provide training, and we have a big library of documents. So we have the standard itself. We have a very large standards guidance that has a chapter on every single part of the code of practice that explains, for example, what issues are around human rights, what sort of other programs are around, how you might practically approach that within a company of different sizes, maybe specific advice for small business, that sort of thing. So we try to really break down and demystify all of these different issues that companies might be trying to grapple with, particularly if you're a small company thinking, wow, CSR, I don't have a dedicated person, this is something sitting on the side of my day job, and I want to better understand how to actively engage in these issues. We also have an assessment workbook, which is a way that companies can go in and assess themselves, first of all, and then auditors use the same tool to find out where evidence that shows how a company is implementing the code of practices can be found. So we do those sorts of tools to help demystify and simplify the audit process and make it more efficient. The chain of custody standard is a nascent program for us, and I think it's interesting to kind of hear the debate about traceability and being able to tell the story of producers. I think it's very important, but it does rely probably on shorter supply chains in order to be able to take that message forward in clear ways. With gold, for example, you can have very long supply chains depending on the nature of mining. And so far, chain of custody certification has focused on building that uptake among refiners. They're a key point in the supply chain. They take material gold that can be recycled as well as gold from mining areas, and their driver, I suppose, is to demonstrate that they are implementing the right kind of due diligence to ensure they don't have those connections with conflict issues and with poor mining practices as well as adverse human rights abuses. So the certification process, I don't know whether the Sustainable Pearl Initiative will go down that path or down another path, but just to break down a little bit what the process is under RJC, is that we provide a process for self-assessment first. We laid out all of the standard in a way that encourages you to reflect on how you're implementing that in your business and how you could show an auditor coming in how you're doing that. An auditor would then come in and evaluate that. They would then generate a report, both to the company, in order to perhaps provide a little bit more detail or more specifics about, I found so-and-so doing X, or I found this kind of systemic problem. And then a report to RJC as well that might identify individual people, but that certainly identifies any areas of non-compliance. The RJC then takes the decision of the auditor, make sure the audit's all been done properly, that issues that are meant to be applicable to that kind of company have been reviewed, and then issues the certification. And then there's a periodic review process depending on the certification period. So that's an average kind of certification or audit cycle that might take place in a program that you might be looking to look at. So finally, just to think about some other sectors. I mean, we've heard, I think, from Tiffany and from others that have been looking at the Forest Stewardship Council program for forest management practices. In fisheries, we've heard about the Marine Stewardship Council, also the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, and all of these were in fact WWF initiatives looking at how consumers could become more aware of these natural resources and how their consumer buying practices could in fact influence raising of the bar. There's usually a premium type model associated with it. Likewise, in coffee, tea and cocoa, Fair Trade, Wood Certified, Rainforest Alliance and Agricole 4C are very active in these areas, and again they're very consumer facing and looking at market share type issues and raising consumer awareness about production practices in these sectors. And they're all kind of agricultural type of initiatives and focus at that production level. There are, however, some emerging initiatives coming out. There's an initiative in Asia which is looking specifically at child labour in rug making. It's called Good Weave. So we're seeing initiatives that are becoming very targeted and specific. In oil and gas production, there's an initiative called Equitable Origin, which is saying, okay, yes, non-renewable resources like this are not great, and we're trying to transition out into a more renewable energy mix and so on. But in the meantime, we're all using these materials. How can we make sure that they have the least kind of environmental impact that's possible? So this is a kind of a controversial sector where it's very interesting to kind of see a certification model emerging. There are initiatives emerging for natural ingredients in consumer products, where it might be something in a L'Oreal product or a shampoo or things like that, where maybe you might be using, particular ingredients like, I can't think, but anyway, something that's promoted as a natural sort of product, and maybe it's the different kinds of oils or different kinds of rare botanical ingredients. And in that example, it's the Unilevers and others that might be looking to ensure that their supply chains have those responsible practices, but they're not looking to promote the certification. It's not a consumer-facing claim. And so you see these sorts of certification models in a much more B2B context. They're just something that a large retailer or a large manufacturer can kind of have in the background to make sure they're managing an issue, but they're not using it as a brand in and of itself. And likewise, for sugar production and refining, there's an initiative called Bulk Sucro that's looking at certifying sugar mills and their approaches to sourcing sustainability from sugar production sites. Now, if you're Coke or you're something else, you're not wanting to say, this is full of sugar, and the sugar's great. That's another one that's behind the scenes, where those big suppliers those big manufacturers and big brands are looking to kind of manage that risk, but not really promote that ingredient. So this is just interesting, I think, to kind of think about. There's a lot of different models emerging, and that's not going to be the case for pearls because that's the product, and there's not any mixing that's going on, that's what's being featured. And likewise for diamonds and for gold, it's a material that's being sold in and of itself, and that consumers, that's what they're actually looking to buy in a very fine and craftsman-like form. But there are initiatives that are looking at lots of different pathways to ensuring good practices, but that aren't necessarily consumer-facing. So in terms of where RJC sits on this, we've very much taken a business-to-business model within the supply chain, and that's probably because its genesis has come out of these different supply chain participants coming together, looking to create a common standard in the industry where there had been multiple initiatives from different companies emerging, and there was looking for that consolidation. So that's been RJC's approach. So we haven't really focused on a consumer-facing initiative, and I know Julie kind of looked at RJC awareness and some of the consumer surveys, so I'm interested in hearing more about that at another point too. But RJC's, I guess, principles have been very much based on having that common standard, building a credible system such that all supply chain participants can benefit from that and understand that there's a rigorous approach being implemented, to look at support and capacity building to help raise standards within the industry. Again, not a policeman, but trying to sort of raise all boats. To have stakeholder recognition, so we have a multi-stakeholder standard setting process, very broad-ranging consultative processes for when we look to hear perspectives on how our standards are evolving, and then collaborative initiatives with various stakeholders as well in terms of the implementation. And then finally, we looked for a model that's tried to be cost effective, where the costs of the governance of an organisation like this are shared across all participants. And again, it's that model of the industry working together collectively to maintain and build the trust of consumers in the product, but without necessarily having it as a marketing or consumer-facing initiative. So for some members, it's something that they would have front and centre in their own marketing materials about how they're dealing with this. In others, it would be very much in the background. It's something that gives them confidence about what they're doing. It's a kind of an internal check, an internal review of how they're travelling, but it's not part of their marketing piece, and that can be because their own brands are very strong and they're not looking to kind of have this to help promote that. So we have a very wide spectrum of members, and members take different approaches. You may find within the pearl industry that you've got a more coherent set of values that maybe take things in a different direction. But with nearly 500 members now, we have a lot of diversity in our membership, so we have to accommodate those different kinds of models. That's it. We have a big website. I have a couple of progress reports outside on the table if anyone's interested in picking those up, but all of that's available online, including all of our materials.